Classification. Over time, scientists have identified more than 1 million kinds of organisms on Earth, and the number is growing. It's difficult to find information about one particular organism if you had no idea where to begin. So scientists began to organize organisms based on similarities. Classification is this process of grouping things based on their similarities. Biologists use classification to organize living things into groups so that organisms are easier to study. The scientific study of how living things are classified is called taxonomy. Taxonomy involves not only classifying animals, but also involves naming them. In the 1750s, the Swedish naturalist Carolus Linnaeus devised a system of naming organisms that is still used today. Linnaeus placed organisms in groups based on their observable features, and based on these observations, he gave each organism a unique two-part scientific name. This naming system Linnaeus used is called binomial nomenclature. The first word in an organism's scientific name is its genus. A genus is a classification grouping that contains similar, closely related organisms. For example, pumas and house cats are all classified in a genus Felis. The second word in the scientific name often describes a distinctive feature of an organism, such as where it lives or its appearance. Together, the two words indicate a unique species. A species is a group of similar organisms that can mate with each other and produce offspring that can also mate and reproduce. Therefore, a puma is called a Felis concolor and a house cat is called a Felis domesticus. Now, this binomial nomenclature made it easy for scientists to communicate because everyone uses the same name for the same organism. That was because before, people in different regions were using a different name for an organism. For example, people in one region called an animal a woodchuck, and in another region called this same animal a groundhog, and even in another region called this animal a whistlepig. Fortunately, it has only one scientific name, Marmota monax. The classification system that scientists use today is based on the contributions of Linnaeus. Most biologists today classify organisms into 8 levels. First, an organism is placed into a broad group, which is then divided into more specific groups. The more classification levels that organisms share, the more characteristics they have in common. The 8 classification levels that biologists commonly use start at the top with the domain, which is the highest level of organization. Within a domain, there are kingdoms, and within those kingdoms, there are phylums. Within phyla are classes, which then moves to orders, families, and then in each family will contain one or more genus, and each genus contains one or more species. Looking at this diagram, you can see how a red fox is classified. When scientists discovered DNA, they were able to use these molecular methods to start comparing species. This innovation allowed new ways to build phylogenetic trees about evolutionary relationships. Phylogeny is a study of how living and extinct organisms are related to one another. Phylogenetic trees is a pattern of branches and deeper branches that point in evolutionary splits from a common ancestor. Each evolutionary branch in a phylogenetic tree is called a clade, and clades, like taxonomic levels in classification, can nest within larger clades. A common method that biologists use to determine the sequencing of branching in a phylogenetic tree is called cladistics. The key rule in cladistics is that all the organisms of a particular clade must share homologous structures that do not occur outside the clade. These unique features that unite the organism as a clade are called derived characters. A phylogenetic diagram that specifies the derived characters of clades is called a cladogram. Here's an example of a cladogram that shows how derived characters can be used to identify clades among certain vertebrates or animals with backbones. All the species shown here share a common ancestor that had a backbone. Now compare the animals in the cladogram. The chimp, the mouse, the pigeon, the lizard, and the salamander all have lungs. This derived character unites this clade and does not include the perch or the hagfish. Claws or nails, adapted for gripping and tearing, is a derived character that unites the lizard, pigeon, mouse, and chimp. Similarly, having fur and mammary glands unites the mouse and chimpanzee and does not include the other organisms. Okay, it's time to stop here and show what you know.